Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review, and it's the final Desert Gem review in the collection from 2019. It's also the last Desert Gem that has come out, so it has now been 5 years since we have had a Desert Gem release from Frederic Malle, and it is Julien Rasquinet's The Moon. Now, this is a very interesting fragrance and right in Julien Rasquinet's wheelhouse, okay? He was literally made to make this fragrance. There's a very interesting backstory on Julien Rasquinet that I want to read to you guys. But first, I have to say, you're seeing me in my green Stars jersey. We just got knocked out of the Western Conference Finals. We will not be going to the Stanley Cup Finals. So probably the last time you'll see me in a Stars jersey until next season. Sad news. But I am proud of the team. I really wanted Joe Pavelski and Ryan Sutter and Jamie Benn and, you know, those guys that have been around what seems like forever and never got a Stanley Cup to get one. But alas, you know, there's always next year, and the team has had a good run. It just feels like they're almost just, they need like one or two more pieces to put them over the hump. Okay. Anyways, so let's talk about the Moon, which is the exact opposite color of this shirt. It is red, not green, although we'll talk about why it is red in color and not green here in a little bit. But I want to read you a little bit about Julien Rasquinet, the perfumer, because he has an amazing story. So it says Julien Rasquinet's life took a decisive turn when his father met nose extraordinaire Pierre Bourdon by accident in an airport. Rasquinet, who did not know anything about perfumery beyond his passion for it. That would be like if I met Pierre Bourdon in an airport. Bourdon decided to take him as his final pupil over thousands of other candidates and bear his legacy as Edmund Rudnitska had done with him. Call it perfumer's intuition. Crazy, crazy story, okay? And as we know, he went on to make some of my all-time favorites, like Royal Oud for Creed, which, of course, he worked on the house that Pierre Bourdon basically, in a sense, I don't want to say created, but he almost made Creed what it is to me. If it wasn't for Pierre Bourdon, we would not have Creed in its modern form, right? So Julien Rasquinet is responsible for Royal Oud, which I still need to do a full proper review on the channel, and he is responsible for this little bad boy, two of my favorite Julien Rasquinet fragrances. So let's talk a little bit about the fragrance. But first, I want to talk about a little backstory on a couple things. Well, number one, the Moon shares some similarities with some of Julien Rasquinet's previous releases, especially Rare Fidelis by the House of Histoire de Parfum, which I also need to do a review on the channel. I believe this came out in 2015, so we're talking years before the Moon came out. If you've smelled some of his other fragrances like St. Dupont's Perfect Tobacco or Amouage Enclave, you will know he was tailor-made for the Middle Eastern perfumery. And there's a very specific reason why he was so tailor-made for Middle Eastern perfumery, and that's because he made a very economically and viable and smart decision. He basically looked at the landscape and said, okay, I could try to be a perfumer in Grasse, France, but in Dubai, there's actually not enough perfumers. So what he did is he made kind of this smart decision to move to the Middle East, learn Middle Eastern perfumery because he saw there was a need for it. And as it ended up coming full circle, as sometimes life does, that Middle Eastern style of perfumery exploded. And all of a sudden, he was right at the leading forefront of that. I believe he's an IFF perfumer. Don't quote me on that, but I believe he is. So before we get started into the details and the construction on the Moon, and by the way, you can see I have given this a fair amount of wears also, not just this, but I had myself a decant of the Moon before. This is one of Moudessier's famous decants. You've probably seen these. These are great decants. They don't leak. They don't allow juice to just kind of evaporate out. And I've probably given 3 or 4 mils worth of wear. So I would probably guess about 10 mils worth of wear from the Moon that I've worn, which with my collection is a fair amount of wear. It's more than enough for me to know the fragrance and do a review like this. So I think Frederic Malle absolutely nailed the names of the Desert Gem collections. Things like the Night, Dawn, Promise, and The Moon are absolutely perfect, but The Moon is my all-time favorite name of all of them. I like The Night. I like Dawn. Promise is probably my least favorite name of the bunch, even though it's one of my favorite fragrances from Frederic Malle, period. But what the reason why I think The Moon is such a perfect name is that in the Arabic world, even to this day, the moon holds special symbolism. So if you look on many of the Arabic country flags, you will see a star and crescent, or a crescent moon and star combination of some sort, okay? Or on their flag or coat of arms or something like that, okay? Even in modern day Arabic countries, they still use that crescent moon. And many people think that tradition goes all the way back to the Ottoman Empire, okay? Also, for those of you who do not know, the traditional calendar in the Middle East is the lunar calendar. So, you kind of see the moon is like a perfect name for a Middle Eastern fragrance. I just think they nailed the naming and the packaging, and I even dug out the box for you guys. Here, I'll read you the little blurb. There's Julien Rasquinet with his 1970s style afro. So it says Celestial Romance. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, okay? Celestial Romance. The moon plays a leading role in conducting the rhythm of life in the Middle East, her ethereal appearance hailing the beginning and end of all festivity. Yet in Arabic, invoking the moon is also an allusion to romance. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. My moon, an adoringly grandiose term for one's beloved that speaks of beauty and eternal devotion. Exuding a warm, opulent quality, rose, oud, and frankincense meet a surprising abundance of ripe red berries. Keep in mind the word ripe. In subtle evocation of the fruit-flavored shisha enjoyed across the region, that's that hookah smoke, the profusion of red currant and raspberry notes add sweetness and color. Okay, so there's the blurb. This is a colorful fragrance, I will tell you that, but focus on the whole, to call someone my moon is literally like a romantic term, saying like, you're my life, or you're my heart. And if you think of that heart analogy, think of the pink Valentine Day chalky hearts you used to get as a kid or something, right? Or think of a blood moon. Think of a blood moon. That's a great analogy. Think of a blood moon. That is much closer to the imagery of the moon. Not the blood, but the color. The red color. The color of love. The color of passion. The color of romance. And the moon basically starts off smelling like a red raspberry hookah. And it's by far, hands down, by far, traditionally the most ambery of all of the Desert Gem collections, okay? It's very syrupy and rich and mystical. It has this magical mystery about it. Very ambery, the most ambery of all of them, okay? So you would think, wow, you know, these Middle Eastern fragrances, they're all going to be ambery. They're not. Dawn is very frankincense heavy. The Night focuses on that portrait of a lady impression with that big dose of Indian oud. And we just talked about Promise today with that big Cypriol feel. This is kind of the amber, the heavy ambery bunch. It's very syrupy and rich, okay? And if you watched my review of Promise, you probably picked up on the fact that I mentioned fermented apple, giving off this apple cider, apple vinegar feeling, which I thought was a masterstroke by Reveiw, okay? And it almost ties together with the feeling of fermented oud, since fermentation in oud is such a big part of kind of why you smell that animalic barnyard fecal, quote-unquote fecal note, as some people say. It's what gives that traditional funky oud smell, the fermentation of the oud. And so it's a brilliant masterstroke, I thought, by Reveiw in 2017 to use that fermented vinegar apple cider thing in Promise. Now, here, I think Julien Rasquinet basically looked and said, wow, what a good trick Dominique Reveiw hit upon. I will have some of that. And I almost think he kind of borrowed it for himself, that fermented accord. But he decided he was going to use it with his own fruit accord. And he's used raspberry and oud in a couple other fragrances, which very notably Rare Fidelis. We'll talk a little bit about that here, maybe tomorrow, who knows. I've been on a little bit of an oud kick lately, so we will see how this goes. But one of these days soon, we'll talk about Rare Fidelis in this lychee accord, okay, with red currant. And now, lychee, if you have never had it, is basically this fruit We sometimes get here in Texas, not very often, but sometimes we do, depending on the season. It has this very weird, transparent fruit flesh like thing. It almost feels like there's this milky, sort of creamy, like transparent membrane over the fruit. But it's very sort of refreshing to eat, okay? And it's very flavorful, extremely flavorful. And it almost has this rose water like taste to me. So, for example, there's this Indian restaurant that I frequently visit, and they sell one of my favorite drinks. I used to always get a different drink. I used to always get mango lassi when I go, and then I discovered this other drink, which is basically milk and rose water blended together, and they put some other things in there, chai seeds or something. I don't know what the hell they are, but it's a fantastic drink. I love rose water, always have. Rose, let's say, is connected to many of the women and girls in my family. And so rose water for me has a special kind of place. I remember lots of Arabic sweets being sweetened with rose water. And so that leche smell is different, but it reminds me a little bit of rose water and milk. And that rose water and milk drink from this Indian restaurant I always get reminds me of leche. And it kind of smells hand in hand with what you smell in the Moon. By the way, this is about a 2-hour dry down. Like I said, I'm very familiar with the scent, but you're not going to get a fresh spray out of me today. There's no need. I just sprayed a couple hours ago, and the thing's an absolute beast. This is right up there with promise for one of the strongest fragrances, by the way. It lasts forever. I mean, this is like a 16-hour fragrance on my skin. So just imagine this fermenting fruit accord, and then I want you to imagine smoking it out of a hookah, all right? So imagine you're literally sitting around with your buddies, smoking this red currant, lychee, raspberry fruit accord that Julien Rasquinet created out of a hookah. And when you smoke it, the smoke reminds you of incense. It reminds you of frankincense because, of course, the smoke is in the air. And it reminds you of kind of sitting around smoking hookah, swapping stories, that kind of thing, right? The Moon literally gives me the texture, okay? Not necessarily the smell, but the texture of bubblegum. So there's like this... I know a lot of people say, well, this fragrance smells like bubblegum or that fragrance smells like bubblegum. That's not what I'm talking about here with the Moon. I'm talking literally about the texture. Like imagine that kind of cheap double bubble that people give out at Halloween and stuff like that. And, you know, it's really hard until you start to chew it, and then it kind of softens up a little bit, but it's still a little hard to chew, but it has that very pink feel. The Moon feels much more elastic and elongated than even Dawn, which is interesting because Dawn, I believe, on the Frederic Malle website, they use the term elongated. The Moon feels much more elongated to me because it has that bubblegum-like texture to it, this pink texture, if you will. Some people say gummy bears. I've heard Hasbro gummy bears to represent it. I'm saying pink bubblegum that feels very chewy, and I think it's because of the amber. But finally, the biggest piece of the puzzle to understanding the Moon, especially in the opening, very important, is the cumin on the top. So it's very, very evident if you pay close attention. If you're someone who sprays and then, you know, just goes and you're not sitting there sniffing your wrist, it's possible you could miss the cumin, but you probably smell it, or you at least smell the spice of the cumin. Here it gives it this brown, bitter, seedy-like feel, okay? So sometimes in the online fragcom, cumin is bashed for having this sulfur, sweaty-like feel. You know, they say that they say sweaty cumin, and you know, there's some hate in the online fragcom for cumin. That being said, here I get none of the sweatiness. So if you are someone who is not a fan of sweaty cumin, this is a fragrance to try. This is one I really think you should try, even though it does have a very apparent cumin note right at the top. And it acts as kind of this powerful, spicy aspect that acts in stark contrast to the sort of pink bubblegum texture that I mentioned earlier. It's a beautiful contrast, and you add it all up. When you mix it all together with that fermented fruit accord, the smoky frankincense kind of weaving its way in and out. Let's say you're hanging out at the hookah bar, and instead of actual smoke coming out of your mouth, it's pure, you know, frankincense. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. You know, smelling this now is making me say, do I really think Promise is my favorite? Maybe it's the Moon. I don't know. There's many, many good Frederic Malles, but it almost feels like a cloud. When you mix the fermented fruit together and the frankincense kind of floating up in the air, it almost feels like a cloud floating in front of the moon at night. You know how sometimes you're standing there looking at the moon and you'll see this cloud kind of come in front in beautiful imagery. And you basically, if you understand what I just described there over the last 15 minutes or so of describing the moon, you have your hands around 80% of the fragrance, okay? You have the perfume pretty much down at a very high level, okay? As the fragrance dries, though, basically, ingredients just seem to kind of switch positions. Sort of how the moon goes through these different phases. Sort of how the moon has like a full moon, a new moon, all that good stuff. And, when the moon changes, for example, when it's a new moon, it can sort of change the tides on the earth, right? It can bring new moon phases, bring the heaviest tides on earth, because the moon's actually closer to the sun, so the moon can actually affect the tides more than the sun, even though the sun's much bigger, that kind of thing, right? So the fragrance almost seems to go through these different, like, lunar phases, if you will. Sometimes the smoke really blows me away with its realism. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's the ambery bits that are kind of very prominent in front and center. But always, always, the cumin goes away after 30 or 45 minutes on my skin. It's really the opening. You get the cumin, and you get this leathery take on oud, okay? But when the fragrance hits its stride, the cumin goes away. Now, some people have said that Frederic Malle uses lower quality ouds compared to some of the more artisanal houses. I can't know if that's true or not. I mean, my nose is not, I don't know how you would tell that just by sniffing a fragrance like this. But one thing I will say about the moon that is very interesting is, do you know how whenever you put like a rose emoji on your phone, sometimes it's either the fresh rose or you get the rose that looks wilted, like the rose from Beauty and the Beast where the petals are falling off kind of thing, right? And it looks like the rose is wilted and has some age on it, like it's been sitting on your kitchen counter for a couple weeks, okay? No matter how much plant food and water you give it, it only lasts so long, right? It's a rose. So the Turkish rose and the moon feels like the wilted rose emoji. It's a deep, deep, dark, jammy, red rose. Very red, deep, dark red, lipstick red, with hints of sweet, smoky, almost like honeyed tendrils. The sweet honeyed tendrils that kind of reach your nose. It's almost as if the water inside of that hookah that I was describing is filled with rose water instead of just regular plain old water, right? So rumor has it that the #1 place on earth for Turkish rose, I'm sure it's not a rumor, it's probably true, but I read that it's Sparta. Now, I've never been to Turkey, never been to Saudi Arabia, where in Turkey it's Sparta for Turkish rose, and Saudi Arabia it's the Taif rose, but in both places it's a once-a-year event that they pick this very special type of rose. I wish I was independently wealthy and then I could just travel the world and see these sights, and I think it would be an amazing sight to behold, this once a year kind of rose picking marathon. But also and always in the moon, sometimes there are some that are sometimes there's sometimes there's an always, a sometimes, and a never, right? So one of the always that happens when I wear the moon is so the fragrance basically begins to give off as the hours tick by, especially an hour to 2 hours in. It starts to give off this feeling of extremely smooth leather. Very, very smooth. Like I'm talking like calf skin, or maybe like lamb skin, maybe like the softest leather you could ever imagine, okay? Moisturized, soft leather. Extremely refined. Comes out into the dry down. Now, some of that could be an actual leather accord. Some of that could be the oud itself turning slightly leathery. That I don't know. I would say, though, that as far as the amount of oud that you the amount of oud that you actually get when you're wearing these goes, the price on the Desert Gems line is a pretty good indicator of the amount of oud that you will smell in the fragrance. So, for example, the Night is the most expensive, and it has 21% Indian oud according to Ropillon, and it's the most expensive. Then comes dawn, and you really smell it almost in this exact ranking, if you will. So the night has the most oud, then dawn, then the moon, and then finally promise, which I just reviewed today. You can check that review out. It almost feels like this embellished oud thanks to the cypriol and all that stuff, but I still absolutely love it. So as the fragrance dries down, you will almost always smell this ambery glow into the dry down, okay? So it's almost as if the moon has that yellow golden tint to it. And on some special nights you're outside, sometimes the moon just has that golden tint to it. The redness of kind of the red currant and the berries and the raspberry seem to kind of give way into the dry down. And along with that sort of along with that leatheriness comes a little bit of this ambery glow, okay? It's one of the constants. And almost like how the moon is always there, even if it's in its new moon celestial cycle and we can't see it from Earth, the moon is obviously still there. It doesn't just disappear, right? That ambery glow into the dry down is a constant. And as I said earlier, it's definitely the most ambery of the Desert Gem collection. So one thing I would say that separates it from dawn and the night, which, as I said, those two are tied at the hip. It almost feels like dawn is like a continuation of the night. Like the night has been on your skin for 12 hours, and then dawn really kicks up from there and takes the baton and runs with it. In the moon, and this is what I think ties the moon the most to Rare Fidelis, is that the oud that's used here has, I don't want to say no skank to it, but very limited skank. It doesn't smell as animalic or cheesy or vinegary or lacquered or all the different ways you can describe oud. It doesn't have those telltale signs like, let's say, for example, the night or dawn, okay? Those two, where you could really feel the presence of the oud much heavier. Here, the oud has very minimal skank to it, okay? It's not a skanky oud. It's almost like you can feel the presence of the oud more than you can really smell the big hardcore animalic facets, okay? But the fact that leathery dry down feels so posh and so soft and so moisturized, and it's just amazing, while still smelling like leather and not going to suede, and that unique oriental kind of creation that Rasquinet created, to me makes this a very mysterious and like thought-provoking type fragrance, okay? So I think it's interesting that 2019 is the last year we got a Desert Gem release from Frederic Malle. It's been 5 years now. They went 2014 with the night to 2019 and they released 4. And now all of a sudden it's like they just stopped. Like they were like, that's it. We've got 4. That's enough. I would like to see another one of these. I think it would be cool for them to do something like, I don't know, Lunar Eclipse. Lunar Eclipse would be a badass flanker of the moon or something like that. Solar Eclipse, the sun. They still haven't done the sun or something like that, right? I think that would be cool. So there's a lot of things that they could still do, but it does feel like they've definitely taken their foot off of the gas. And I will tell you that the pricing of the moon is fairly reasonable. I hate to say that, but it's true. When you look at some of the pricing on these Desert Gems, 50 mils is $550. So it's not like, the night, where 50 mils, like whatever it was, $1,200 or something. And 100 mils is $950 of the moon. Okay, so 100 mils is $950. So this is the 100 mil right here, but I did not pay anywhere near that. I got a pretty good deal on this, but yes, it is not cheap stuff, but it's not as expensive as the night. So it kind of sits in that, let's say, lower end bracket. It's not in the top 2 highest cost Desert Gems, okay? But it is a very mysterious and thought-provoking fragrance. And if you've ever just sat on like a clear night and just kind of stared at the moon and just let your mind wander and kind of think about how many people over the ages have done exactly what I'm doing right now, staring at the moon and asking probably the exact same questions. Why are we here? What's it all for? What's the purpose? Is there madness behind it, or is it all just random? All that kind of thing, right? So many humans have looked up to the moon and used its light at night to kind of help them along the way and all that stuff, and it's been a constant there for the whole human race. And you know, that kind of thought-provoking feel is a hallmark of oud for me. Like when I wear just pure oud fragrances, that's something that happens. And so the fact that this does it again, I think that you're paying for the brilliance of the perfumer making these fragrances with Frederic Malle's creative directorship standing behind it. Okay, so that's why you're paying the big money. The ingredients are good, but it's overpriced. I mean, there's no doubt about it that it's overpriced to me. But I do think that the ingredients are good, and I do think that these fragrances move me. I mean, I like wearing them. It's June, and I'm choosing to wear these. Which, you know, I know some people may gasp, but I like wearing these kind of Middle Eastern style fragrances in the heat. I just do. And so, yeah, it's a fragrance that I really like. I really enjoy. It's definitely one of my favorites. I just realized today when I did my Promise review that I have not ranked my Cypriol video. This is not a top 10 Cypriol, so I'll go back and do that. That'll be a fun video where you'll see Promise and some others in there. But yeah, I mean, as far as real oud fragrances from the niche side go, this is one of the better ones, I think. And I'm a fan of Julien Rasquinet. I'm a fan of his work. I like what he's done. And I'm glad to finally be reviewing this. And sometimes my fragrance reviews are kind of streaky. You know, sometimes I get on a trend and we just do a bunch of them. And it's been a Frederic Malle Desert Gem kick lately. I've been ignoring these for the longest time, and bam, now we knocked all 4 of them out in 4 days or whatever it is. So it's a pleasure to be doing these. If you have experience with the Moon, as always, do let me know. I love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching. I hope you take something from these videos, as always. Really appreciate all the feedback and support you guys give me. So look forward to seeing you in the comments. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.